Having explored the complexities of translating Durkheim's work, we now turn our attention to a core element that emerges from his writings: ritual. We're not just going to rehash elementary forms. Instead, we'll focus on how this concept of ritual, as developed by Durkheim and his followers, continues to be fundamental for understanding not just religion, but society itself. It's a thread that runs through much of his thought and has profound implications. Durkheim kicks things off with this striking contrast in Australian Aboriginal life. On one hand, you've got the everyday grind, scattered groups hunting, fishing, basically trying to survive. Durkheim paints this picture as monotonous, slack, and humdrum. Think about your average Monday morning commute, that kind of feeling, right? But then, things flip. When the clan gathers for a ceremony, everything changes. This is sacred time, and it's defined by what Durkheim calls collective effervescence. Imagine the energy at a massive concert or a sports event climax. That's the vibe. People gather, something happens, and suddenly there's this incredible surge of shared emotion, a heightened state of exaltation. It's like static electricity crackling between them. And guess what fuels this fire? Ritual. So, right from the start, Durkheim links ritual directly to this intense, transformative sacred time, setting it apart from the mundane rhythm of profane time. So, if sacred time is all about ritual and collective effervescence, how does this tie into his definition of religion? Durkheim gives us a classic line: a religion is a unified system of beliefs and practices relative to sacred things. What makes these things sacred? They're set apart and forbidden. Think about holy objects, sacred texts, or even places considered special. But notice the crucial part that follows. These beliefs and practices don't just exist in isolation. They unite people into a single moral community, the church. This isn't just about individual faith, it's about creating social cohesion. The shared belief in the sacred, the shared practices surrounding it, these are the mechanisms that bind people together, forming a distinct social group. It's a powerful idea linking the individual's inner world, belief, to the collective structure, community. Now here's where things get really interesting, and where many people might misinterpret Durkheim. He talks about beliefs and practices, organizing his book accordingly. Does that mean belief comes first? Absolutely not. In what might be the most critical chapter, Book 2, Chapter 5, titled Origin of These Beliefs, Durkheim flips the script entirely. He argues that ritual comes before belief. It's the action that births the idea. Look at this passage, it's dense, but stick with me. He says collective representations, beliefs arise because consciousnesses are acting and reacting on each other. You need tangible intermediaries, movement, gestures, actions for minds to meet. The shared physical movements create a sense of group awareness, making the group aware of itself. Only after these movements become stereotyped do they start symbolizing representations. But why? Because the movements helped form those representations in the first place. So, meaning isn't just read off from the ritual like symbols on a page. Meaning arises from the whole package deal: the actions, the reactions, the shared physicality. It's the doing that creates the believing. This leads us nicely to Mary Douglas, who offers a helpful way to think about this without getting stuck in the real versus symbolic trap. She uses the concept of exemplars. Think about Lienhardt's work on Dinka ritual, as Douglas describes it. When they perform a rite, they aren't just symbolically representing a communion meal because they've just eaten one. That would be absurd. Instead, the ritual enacts their intentions, realizes their wish for community divinity. The priest's trance state, where the spirit possesses him, is the realization of the community's desire, not just a symbol of it. And look at the dying sacrificial ox. Its quivering flesh isn't symbolizing something else. It's an example of the same quivering felt in the priest's body during the trance. It's a self-referencing enactment. The ritual provides a sample, a benchmark against which the community measures its own current state and future behavior. It's about embodying an ideal, not just pointing to it. Okay, so if ritual is so fundamental, maybe we can find it even beyond traditional religious contexts. Enter Randall Collins, who takes Durkheim's ideas and blends them with Goffman's microsociology. Collins argues that the most basic building block of social life is what he calls an interaction ritual. Think about any simple social encounter: meeting someone, chatting, collaborating. Collins breaks down the ingredients. First, you need a group, at least two people physically present. Second, they need to focus their attention on the same thing, and crucially, each person has to be aware that the others are also focusing on that thing. Think about a crowd watching a magician. Third, they need to share a common mood or emotion. Maybe it's excitement, maybe it's boredom, maybe it's anger. Once these elements come together, magic happens well, not literal magic, but social magic. The group feels a temporary sense of belonging, a boundary forms between us insiders and them outsiders, a shared moral obligation tied to whatever they focused on, and they get charged with what Collins calls emotional energy, which he links back to Durkheim's moral force. If every social interaction is basically a mini ritual, then ritual becomes the absolute bedrock of social action. And Collins doesn't stop there. He makes a truly radical claim. Language itself is born from this pervasive natural ritual. Think about it. Even our earliest attempts at speaking, rudimentary communication, involve these core ritual ingredients. You need at least two people. You need to focus on the sounds or gestures being exchanged, and you share a common understanding or intent. Because of this ritualistic foundation, Collins argues, words aren't just arbitrary labels. They become collective representations, imbued with moral significance right from the start. Our very ability to communicate socially, to use language, is deeply rooted in these shared emotionally charged interactions. It's a mind-bending idea, suggesting that the tools of thought and communication evolved hand in glove with the fundamental ways we connect socially. This brings us right into the fascinating, often speculative, territory of the origin of language. How did our ancestors, with brains not quite wired for complex language, figure out symbolic communication? Terence Deacon tackles this head-on in The Symbolic Species. His answer is blunt: ritual. He draws a parallel between teaching chimps symbolic communication and the evolutionary leap in humans. Chimps can learn words, but it takes immense effort, external training, repetition. Deacon argues that ritual served a similar function for early humans. Why? Because ritual, especially repetitive ritual performance, is great at shifting our focus. It moves us from concrete indexical links, like a sign pointing directly to an object, like a picture of a cat looking like a cat, to abstract, sign-sign relations like understanding grammar rules, the relationship between words themselves. Repetition makes the details automatic, while the emotional intensity of group participation can heighten our perception of other aspects of the actions and objects involved. Think about a chant or a dance repeated over and over. It can make you see the world differently. Okay, so ritual helped with the mnemonics of language, but what was the big evolutionary push? What problem did symbolic communication solve? Deacon points to a major shift in human prehistory: bigger brains, stone tools, less difference between male and female sizes. This wasn't random. It meant a fundamental change in how early humans lived, hunted, and structured their societies. One big consequence? Stable pair bonding became necessary for survival, dividing labor between providing food and caring for infants. But how do you ensure stability in a relationship? Non-human animal rituals, while common, are mostly about immediate stuff: sex, aggression, submission. They signal readiness or unwillingness now. But human relationships, especially marriage, require looking ahead. They need promises. Symbolic ritual, unlike simple displays, could express abstract ideas about future intentions, define what counts as cheating, and establish rules for the relationship. It allowed humans to represent and enforce social contracts across time. And symbolic ritual didn't just handle one-off promises. It built entire systems of relationships. Think about marriage ceremonies or coming-of-age rituals. These aren't just about the couple or the individual. They involve the whole community, reaffirming roles, marking transitions, and establishing expectations. Marriage puberty rites: these create symbolic roles: husband, wife, warrior, elder. These aren't just biological roles. They're defined within a complete system of potential interactions and transformations. Unlike status in other species, which is fluid, human symbolic status is categorical. It fits into a logical framework. And because of this system, when one person's status changes, everyone else implicitly knows their relationship to that person has shifted too. Deacon even notes that even today, despite sophisticated language, our speech is still heavily tied to ritual, like cultural practices and paraphernalia. Context matters. Deacon suggests the very first symbolic communication might not have been like modern speech. What could it have been? Could music hold the key? Bruno Nettel observes a striking universal: music is central to ritual across all known societies. From this, he concludes that the earliest human music was somehow associated with ritual. But what is music in this context? It's not just about sound. As Freeman and Dissanake point out, music is deeply intertwined with movement. Think about dancing, clapping, chanting, rhythmic tapping, stepping, clapping, and chanting that accompany and indeed produce music. In many traditional cultures, and even in children, movement and music are inseparable. It's a whole body experience. So, what was the evolutionary payoff for this musical ritual? Several contributors to the origins of music emphasize its role in building social solidarity. Freeman calls it a technology for crossing the solipsistic gulf, helping us connect beyond ourselves. It fosters trust and predictability, the bedrock of social life. Dissanayake traces it back even further to the mother-infant bond. She argues that the innate sensitivities in mother-infant interaction, the attuning, synchronizing, emotional connection, are so powerful and effective that human cultures borrowed these components for communal rituals. These rituals served the same purpose, to synchronize, emotionally conjoin, and enculturate participants. It's like Freeman brings it back to Durkheim, quoting him on how ritual creates collective mental states of extreme emotional intensity, where representation merges with action, fostering communion. Music and dance seem to be prime vehicles for this. Freeman takes this a step further using neurobiology. He argues that music and dance evolved as technologies to induce altered states of consciousness. Why? Because these trance states are crucial for breaking down old habits and beliefs, a kind of meltdown. This psychological openness makes personality change possible, paving the way for cooperative action and trust. Bonding isn't just a chemical release. It's the social action of singing and dancing together that, during an altered state, makes new forms of behavior possible. Think about how malleable our minds feel during intense emotional experiences. Freeman suggests musical skills were vital early on, enabling the formation of human societies, which in turn made transmitting knowledge across generations feasible. Ritual, through music and dance, wasn't just about social glue. It was about creating the very conditions for cumulative culture. If early symbolic communication wasn't quite speech, what was it? Stephen Brown proposes a fascinating idea, musalanguage. He sees language and music not as separate evolutionary paths, but as ends of a continuum. At one end, language focuses on referential meaning, words point to things. At the other, music focuses on emotive meaning, sound evokes feelings. Right in the middle is verbal song, the most common form worldwide. Moving towards language, you get poetic discourse, recitative. Moving towards music, you find word painting, leitmotifs. Given this overlap and parsimony, Brown argues the most likely scenario is that both language and music evolved from a common ancestor, musalanguage. And if musalanguage was enacted, involving meaningful gestures alongside sound, then ritual becomes the primeval example of this phenomenon. Even today, ritual often involves deeply intertwined verbal, musical, and gestural elements. Let's zoom back to the nature of ritual itself, drawing heavily on Roy Rappaport's work. His definition is concise but packed. The performance of more or less invariant sequences of formal acts and utterances not entirely encoded by the performers. Notice the emphasis on invariant sequences, repetition, formulaic patterns. This echoes the idea of redundancy in musalanguage, which is key for moving beyond simple associations, indexical to complex meanings, symbolic. Think about musical redundancy, repetition, familiar riffs, motifs, rhythms, and the expectation of what comes next, especially driven by tempo. Humans are unique primates in our ability to keep time externally. This capacity to keep together in time seems crucial for ritual. From this basic definition, Rappaport explores how ritual creates social conventions, establishes a moral order, fosters a sense of the sacred, and shapes our relationship with the cosmos. Rappaport stresses that ritual is fundamentally about performance, and he uses this term in a specific way, drawing from philosophy of language, performative speech. It's not just about describing something or symbolizing it, it's about doing it, enacting it. Think about promising. The act of promising changes your obligations. Similarly, participating in a serious ritual isn't like watching a play. Actors know it's fake afterwards. The audience knows it's just a show. But ritual participation carries weight. It entails a commitment, at the very least solidarity with those you're doing it with. Serious rituals, like rites of passage, can actually transform the participant's role and even their personality. This link between saying and doing is what established convention, the social contract, and morality. For Rappaport, ritual is literally humanity's basic social act. Now let's consider a different angle, offered by Talal Asad. He critiques anthropological tendencies to view ritual merely as symbolic action, where meaning is like a code we crack by observing. Instead, Assad points to an older, perhaps more potent meaning of ritual, discipline. He quotes Hugh of St. Victor on sacraments. They weren't just metaphors, but practices designed to create the right mental and moral dispositions in Christians through regulated practice. Think about penance, fasting, confession. These aren't primarily about expressing feelings. They're about imposing discipline, shaping the self. This resonates with Rappaport's distinction between ritual and drama. Drama expresses meaning without moral consequence, but ritual, as a form of performative action, aims to change the participant fundamentally. It's about constraint and transformation, not just expression. Ritual, then, involves both Moses' techniques of the body, the learned patterns of movement, gestures, ways of handling objects, and a complex web of meanings. Rappaport offers a useful typology of these meanings. Level 1, Low-Order Meaning. This is about basic distinctions, information, answering, what is it? Think of it like information theory. Level 2, Middle-Order Meaning. This is about connection, similarity, analogy, metaphor. It answers, what does it connect? Art, poetry, and ritual excel here, linking different realms of experience. Level 3, High-Order Meaning. This is about identity, unity, radical identification with others or the cosmos. It answers, what does it all mean? This is often found in mystical experiences, frequently induced by ritual. Rational action theory, obsessed with information low-order meaning, misses the point. As Durkheim and Rappaport argue, if we only acted rationally in this narrow sense, we'd be stuck in a Hobbesian nightmare. Ritual pulls us out, creating solidarity, morality, and humanity itself. So ritual is fundamental, but is it safe? Both Rappaport and Durkheim sense trouble brewing in their time: skepticism, cynicism, a moral cold. Today, this anti-ritual sentiment seems amplified. We live in an age obsessed with information, with low-order meaning. Technology and economics thrive on it. But as Rappaport warns, focusing solely on information can undermine middle and high-order meaning, the very stuff that ritual excels at. This isn't just a threat to religion or ritual itself. If Rappaport is right, it's a threat to society and even humanity. Here, Mary Douglas steps in, explicitly analyzing anti-ritualism as a phenomenon. How does Douglas approach this? She cleverly uses Basil Bernstein's analysis of working-class and middle-class families in mid-20th century London. Bernstein identified two distinct patterns of social control and speech. Working-class families tend towards positional control and a condensed speech code. Control comes from hierarchy, role, status. Why must you do this? Because I said so, because you're a boy. Right and wrong are learned based on the given social structure. Middle-class families, conversely, use personal control and an elaborated speech code. Control comes from explaining reasons, appealing to feelings, promoting autonomy. Why can't I do it? Because your father's feeling worried. Control is effected through verbal manipulation of feelings or establishing reasons linking the child to his acts. Douglas uses these contrasting styles to understand broader societal shifts. Now, intuitively, we tend to prefer the elaborated code, right? It sounds more rational, more humane, fostering individual initiative and empathy. But Douglas, way before Foucault was trendy, warns us against this complacency. She argues that the elaborated code, while different, is still a form of control, potentially just as coercive, albeit in subtler ways. Why? Because we all start with positional control and the condensed code. Infants can't engage in complex appeals to feelings or abstract principles. The parent-child relationship is inherently asymmetrical, positional. And guess what infants hear, motherese? That simplified, repetitive, rhythmic, feeling-focused language looks suspiciously like ritual. Douglas's summary is chilling. In this way, the child is freed from a system of rigid positions, but made a prisoner of a system of feelings and abstract principles. Freedom from one form of constraint can lead to entrapment by another. So why did we develop this elaborated code? Douglas points to two main drivers. First, the level of social solidarity. Societies with tight boundaries and clear roles often rely on ritual and condensed codes. Loose-bound societies might lean more on negotiation and elaborated codes. But her primary focus is the second driver, the division of labor. As societies become more specialized, decision-making roles diversify, creating pressure for explicit communication channels about policies and consequences. Think about modern workplaces demanding articulate communication for advancement. Many professions today, especially those Reich calls symbolic analysts, thrive on questioning existing categories, challenging norms, applying the elaborated code. These professionals, Douglas argues, are likely to raise their children using this intellectual challenge model, favoring personal control and focusing on feelings rather than strict rules. Douglas isn't advocating a return to the dark ages of the condensed code. Her point is nuanced. We need both modes of relating. The elaborated code is valuable for critical reflection, for challenging unjust structures embedded in positional authority. We need to inspect our values. But she warns despising ritual entirely, even its magical forms, is irrational. Social responsibility, she argues, depends on symbolic forms. You can't organize effectively without shared symbols and rituals. Philanthropy, if it lacks ritual expression, risks defeating itself. She concludes that no one would deliberately choose the elaborated code if they understood its potential for alienation. The challenge is to recognize the value and necessity of both, finding a balance. So does ritual die out in modern, secularized societies? Not necessarily. While grand public rituals might fade, ritual persists in myriad forms. Remember Collins's interaction ritual, it's everywhere. Even fleeting encounters have ritual elements. Durkheim himself hinted at this when he wrote about the lift we get from social interaction, how society's feeling for us uplifts our feeling for ourselves. Think about a simple conversation. There's a synchronizing rhythm to speech and gestures. There's an implicit affirmation of social solidarity, even if we disagree. There's a recognition of some kind of sacredness, maybe the sacredness of the conversation code, the individuals involved, or both. Ritual isn't just for temples, it's woven into the fabric of daily life. Consider something as basic as eating together. Margaret Visser argues that the rituals of dinner are incredibly important because sharing food inherently requires ritual. Why? Because eating is aggressive by nature. Utensils can be weapons. Table manners are essentially a set of taboos designed to prevent violence. Your personal interest in food clashes with the group's expectations. You have to please placate, not disgust others. And often there's a religious dimension too. Blessings before meals, offerings to ancestors. It's a constant negotiation between individual desire and group norms, mediated by ritualized behavior. Ritual also loves periodicity. Many rituals happen regularly, marking the cycles of life and society. Academic life is full of them: commencements, graduations. Sporting events, from local games to global championships, are highly ritualized affairs following seasonal rhythms. Political life is saturated with periodic rituals. National holidays, elections, inaugurations, treating the nation-state itself as a sacred entity. Religious traditions have weekly worship, yearly calendars. Even economic transactions, though seemingly utilitarian, often involve ritual elements, especially in pre-modern contexts. Even in modern economies, looking closely reveals hidden ritualistic aspects. William McNeill explores another powerful form of ritual: muscular bonding. He argues that rhythmic movement and synchronized voice, whether in dance or drill, consolidate group solidarity by altering human feelings. He starts surprisingly with military drill. Why would soldiers enjoy grueling basic training? McNeill suggests it's the shared physical exertion, the rhythm, the collective voice that builds cohesion. Historically, community-wide singing and dancing, often religious, have been central to small societies. Interestingly, McNeill notes that muscular bonding can empower oppressed groups, citing early prophetism in Israel as an example of discontented groups gaining solidarity. He also highlights the contrast: the often sedate movements of advantaged groups versus the potentially trance-inducing energy of the dispossessed. Benedict Anderson offers another perspective on keeping together in time through what he calls unisonance. This is the experience of simultaneity created by language, especially poetry and songs. Think about national anthems sung on holidays. Millions of strangers, unknown to each other, utter the same words to the same tune at the exact same moment. Anderson describes this feeling of unisonance as creating an imagined community. It feels selfless because we don't know who else is participating. Modern technology, like television, amplifies this effect dramatically, allowing millions to share rituals virtually, like the collective shock and grief following the Kennedy assassination, which unfolded as a mediated ritual drama. Rituals aren't always successful. Sometimes they collapse. Consider the 2000 US presidential election. Elections, even minimalist ones, are inherently ritual events. Millions participate. The outcome matters immensely. But in 2000, things went spectacularly wrong. The Florida recount descended into chaos, media outlets made premature calls, and then the Supreme Court intervened in a way that violated the established constitutional script. It was a complete failure of ritual closure. The result? A winner Bush who emerged with severely damaged legitimacy. A failed ritual can leave a society fractured and uncertain. So, where does this leave us? Understanding ritual requires a long view. As Douglas showed with the Vatican reforms, anti-ritual movements are nothing new, yet ritual persists adapting, sometimes being domesticated like in Hinduism or Israel, sometimes shifting its focus from external sacrifice to internal states. Despite the challenges, figures like Rappaport, echoing Durkheim, argue forcefully that ritual remains humanity's basic social act. Our current era, obsessed with low-order information, might be particularly hostile to ritual, but its fundamental importance for social cohesion, meaning, and morality suggests it's far from obsolete. That's our whirlwind tour of Durkheim and ritual.